Chris is no ordinary diver. He works deep beneath the sea, trained in the high-risk world of saturation diving. He's part of an elite team that repairs underwater pipelines miles below the ocean's surface. Life was finally falling into place for him. He'd just bought a new house and was about to marry the stunning Morag. Then, out of nowhere, Chris walks in one evening and tells Morag he's been called out again. Another intense mission. He'll be gone for an entire month. He asks her to turn their house into a real home while he's away. And even though the job could take his life at any moment, Morag agrees to let him go, because this is the life he chose. Chris soon makes his way to Aberdeen Harbour, the center of North Sea diving operations. He boards the newly upgraded ship and greets his crewmates with a firm handshake. After everyone gets settled, the dive supervisor, Craig, steps in and gives them a serious rundown. The mission: a dangerous dive to 300 feet below to repair part of a pipeline. Once complete, they'll spend 4 long days decompressing before they can return home safely. Chris is teamed up with 2 other men, Duncan and Dave. As they enter the pressurized chamber and begin adjusting to their new environment, tension kicks in. Dave seems cold and distant toward Chris. They've never met before, and Duncan leans in to explain. Dave's not being rude, he's just laser-focused. He's got 2 kids, Duncan says, wants to stay alive for them. Soon after, the chamber doors slam shut and the compression process begins. It's official, there's no turning back now. The ship starts cruising toward the damaged pipeline site. Once they arrive near the oil rig, it feels like they've descended to the bottom of the earth. Craig, the dive supervisor, gathers the team and issues a chilling warning. The dive will take place in pitch black, icy water. He reminds them, in no uncertain terms, that leaving the chamber too early could be fatal. The gas inside their bodies would expand so quickly it could tear them apart. During a quiet moment, Duncan, the oldest and wisest on the team, decides to open up. He shares a bit of his past with Chris and Dave. Back in my day, he says, there were no chambers, just guts and instinct. Then he adds something more serious. This mission will be his last. The company is forcing him to retire. That night, Chris receives a heartfelt video from Morag. As he watches her face on the screen, the distance between them feels even heavier. He misses her badly. Later, the ship docks with the oil rig, and it's time. The dive is about to begin. Chris' team is first. They gear up with precision, each move careful and deliberate. Then they step into the pod that will take them down into the dark unknown. The pod begins its slow descent, heading toward the manifold, 200 to 100 feet below the surface. The hatch opens, and instantly the freezing cold water shocks their senses. Dave is the first to suit up fully. Duncan helps him with his helmet, and he slowly drops into the water. Chris follows, steady and confident, while Duncan keeps a close watch from above. Chris and Dave descend slowly into the deep, finally reaching the manifold below. Someone above tosses them a power cable, and they quickly connect it to the system. Suddenly, light floods the dark water around them, but not enough to pierce the endless blackness of the ocean floor. Chris begins moving carefully through a web of massive pipes. He locates the section where the pressure is spiking and starts adjusting it. Dave hovers nearby, staying alert. Then, out of nowhere, strange readings appear on the ship's monitors. Panic spreads fast. The dynamic positioning operator shouts that the system is failing. Without it, the ship's thrusters go offline, and now the entire vessel is drifting out of control. Up top, Craig, the dive supervisor, Captain Andre, and First Officer Hannah scramble to fix the situation. Down below, Dave urgently tells Chris to get out of the pipe maze. Fast! The mission is now scrapped. The only priority left is saving the divers before they get stranded in the abyss. Chris and Dave rush to the extraction point, but their pod is no longer there. It's drifted away. Then Chris realizes his cord is tangled. It's a nightmare. He may not be able to escape. Meanwhile, Duncan is panicking in the chamber. He keeps feeding more cord to reduce the strain pulling on them. Finally, the cord runs out and the ship stops drifting. Chris's tangled line has anchored them in place. But disaster strikes. Chris's gas line suddenly snaps. His oxygen is gone. He switches to his emergency air supply, but it will only last for 10 minutes. Then, snap! Chris's cord breaks loose, and he plunges helplessly back down to the seabed. Above him, the ship continues to drift farther into the black unknown. Dave, using his own tether, climbs back up with every ounce of strength and barely manages to return to the pod. Meanwhile, chaos unfolds on the ship. Craig suddenly loses contact with both the divers and the pod. When Dave gets inside, he quickly tells Duncan what happened. Chris is still down there alone. Craig immediately urges Captain Andre to drop the anchor and attempt a rescue. But Andre refuses. He says there are too many pipelines scattered across the seabed. Dropping the anchor could trigger a full-blown environmental disaster. Back in the crushing dark below, Chris lies motionless on the seabed. It's silent, freezing, and terrifying. He checks his air. Only 8 minutes left. In desperation, he lights a flare, but it barely cuts through the darkness. He starts moving, trying to find the manifold, the only place his crew might still search for him. Meanwhile, on the ship, the system miraculously comes back online. Andre suggests steering the vessel manually now that they're out of options, but Hannah pushes back. Those controls are only meant for port docking. One wrong move could put them all in danger. Still, Andre insists. They can't keep drifting, or they'll lose Chris forever. Finally, Hannah agrees, and the two of them grab the controls together. Step by step, they fight to stop the ship's deadly drift. Now Chris is down to just 5 minutes of oxygen. Desperate and weak, he keeps searching for the manifold, the only lifeline he has left. After crawling blindly through the dark, he finally spots it and begins climbing, scraping his gloves against the rough metal surface. But suddenly, his flare slips from his hand and drops into the void below. He quickly grabs another and lights it. Pushing himself onward, he finally reaches the top of the manifold, clinging to it like it's his last hope, but his oxygen is almost gone. As he gasps for breath, blurry visions of Morag fill his mind. He sees her smile, hears her voice. Is this the end? Back in the pod, Dave is convinced Chris didn't make it, but Duncan refuses to give up. On the ship, a remote drone is deployed to search the ocean floor. After a tense wait, they finally spot something. Chris. He's lying on top of the manifold, barely hanging on. The drone moves closer. Craig stares at the monitor. Chris's eyes are shut, his body still intact. But he isn't breathing. He's twitching from lack of oxygen. It's been almost 8 minutes without air. Then the dynamic positioning operator steps up. He tells Andrew the system failure is due to a glitch in the startup CPU. He says, I can rewire everything and bypass it. Andrew nods. Do it. Meanwhile, Craig pleads with Andrew, the drone pilot, to bring Chris back using the drone. But Andrew refuses. It's only meant to carry dead bodies, he says. Craig doesn't hesitate. I'm responsible for his life. He grabs the controls himself. Craig grips the drone controls, his hands tense as he tries to grab hold of Chris. But it's not easy. The drone misses over and over again. He takes a deep breath, focuses completely, and starts making tiny, precise movements. Slowly, carefully, he maneuvers the drone toward Chris's shoulder harness, and finally locks on. Success. But when Craig attempts to lift Chris upward, nothing happens. Confused, he checks the drone's camera. That's when he sees it. Chris has clipped himself to the manifold. He did it to stop the current from dragging him into the dark. It was a smart move. But now it's preventing Craig from saving him. Craig lowers Chris back down gently and unhooks the drone. But the clock is still ticking. Chris has now been without oxygen for 17 minutes. The entire crew is beginning to lose hope. Then, Duncan speaks. He turns to Dave and shares, the first time he met Chris, it was during a rescue mission. They were recovering the bodies of lost fishermen. Most were found, but one was never recovered. The ocean likely swallowed him whole. Duncan says they handed the man's wife a shoebox filled with his belongings. Then, with firm conviction, he says, "I won't do that to Morag. We're not giving her a box. We're bringing Chris home." Up above, the dynamic positioning operator is soaked in sweat as he carefully rewires the entire system. It's intense. The ship's positioning system roars back online. Andre wastes no time. He orders the crew to steer back to the manifold. Power and communication return to the pod. Then Craig radios Duncan for the first time in ages and says, "We're coming for Chris." Without hesitation, Dave suits up and dives straight back into the freezing ocean depths. He reaches the manifold and finds Chris lifeless and clipped in. Dave wastes no time. He unhooks Chris and grabs hold of him tightly before beginning the dangerous journey back to the pod. But then, disaster strikes again. The ship's thrusters suddenly fail a second time. The pod begins swinging wildly and nearly smashes both men against the manifold. In a desperate move, Dave shields Chris with his own body and manages to steer them away just in time. Now the real challenge begins. Dave must pull them both up along the cord with sheer strength. The entire crew watches breathlessly as he climbs, one painful inch at a time. His arms are burning, but his determination is unbreakable. He reaches the pod's base and hauls Chris up with him. Then, with shaky hands, he secures the winch around Chris, and Duncan pulls him inside. Inside the pod, Duncan gently removes Chris's helmet and immediately starts CPR. Chris has been without oxygen for over 29 minutes, his body barely clinging to life. Duncan doesn't stop. He keeps pumping air into Chris's lungs, refusing to quit. Finally, Chris takes a breath. He's alive. Moments later, Dave climbs inside the pod too, completely exhausted. Duncan helps remove his helmet and announces over the radio, "Chris is breathing," but he's not responding. Duncan kneels beside Chris and speaks to him, but there's no reaction. Chris lies completely still. Dave also tries. Nothing. For a moment, it seems like they were too late. Duncan's heart sinks, but deep down, he's grateful they didn't leave Chris behind. Softly says Dave's name. Dave and Duncan freeze in disbelief, then erupt with joy. He's alive and aware. Craig's voice crackles over the comms. "What's going on down there?" Duncan replies, overwhelmed. "Chris is responsive. He's talking." Cheers explode across the ship. The entire crew celebrates. After all the chaos, their efforts have paid off. The captain steps forward, proud, and congratulates everyone. "We're going home," he says with a smile. Craig seals the pod hatch and brings the divers back to their pressurized chamber. Inside, Chris lies wide-eyed, unable to sleep. Dave checks in on him. When Dave quietly says, "You were gone for almost 40 minutes, Chris is stunned. He whispers that he feels like he failed Morag. He nearly left her behind. But then he pauses. "It didn't hurt," he says. "When I passed out, I felt peace." He turns to Dave and thanks him from the bottom of his heart for saving his life. Moments later, Chris finally drifts into a deep sleep. Dave sits quietly and pulls out photos of his daughters. His hands tremble as he realizes how close he came to never holding them again. On the second day of decompression, Chris calls Morag. She gasps when she hears his voice. She thought he'd be out of reach for weeks. Chris tells her there was a problem with the ship, but promises, "I'll be home the day after tomorrow." After the last decompression day, the crew exits the chamber, but Duncan stays a moment longer. It's his final day on the job. He looks around, the chamber where he always felt most alive. Now, it's time to say goodbye. Finally, Chris returns home. He wraps Morag in his arms and tells her everything. She can't believe he survived, but Chris promises her one thing: no matter what, I'll always come back. This isn't fiction. It's the true story of Chris Lemons, the diver who lost his oxygen supply for nearly 30 minutes during a deep-sea mission and somehow survived with no lasting physical or mental damage. Scientists believe a rare mix of extreme depth and icy cold temperatures may have saved him, but to this day, no one can fully explain how he's still alive. Just 3 weeks after the accident, Chris, Dave, and Duncan bravely returned to the bottom of the North Sea to finish the job they started. The end. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy true survival stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you.